Breaking news, one stammers, voice trembling through the static. Peter Thiel's offshore funds have just collapsed. The ticker screams 800 million in losses. Traders stare at their monitors, jaws slack, as if watching a digital hurricane erase years of power in seconds. Then silence. A woman's voice, calm, deliberate, cuts through the chaos. "All I did," she says, "was tell the truth." The image freezes. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, head slightly bowed, eyes steady under the fluorescent glare of a hearing room. Behind her, cameras flash like lightning. The screen splits, half the world burning in numbers, half her unflinching face. The narrator steps in, low and cinematic. How did a first-term representative from Texas dismantle one of the world's most untouchable billionaires? How did a single question echo so loud that it toppled an empire? Shots flicker, private jets idling on a tarmac, offshore servers blinking in tropical night, a nervous aide whispering into a phone. Then back to Crockett, walking into Congress with a folder in hand, the kind of quiet confidence that makes even power nervous. "This wasn't luck," the voice continues. "It was precision. The truth doesn't need a fortune, it just needs a microphone." News clips flash in succession. Markets rattle after Thiel fund exposure. Congresswoman's question sparks financial firestorm. Silicon Valley mogul silent amid fallout. Social media explodes, hashtags trend. Reaction videos multiply, and somewhere in the noise, millions of ordinary people find a new name to rally behind. For the first time, the billionaire class looks vulnerable. For the first time, a freshman from the South has made them sweat. The screen fades to black, the voice slowing to a whisper that feels almost reverent. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She just told the truth, and the walls began to crack. Then, the question that pulls the audience forward like gravity. But the real story didn't begin with the crash. It began months earlier, when Jasmine Crockett asked one question no billionaire wanted to answer. Washington doesn't hum, it buzzes. Lobbyists glide through marbled hallways like ghosts in tailored suits, whispering deals that never make the evening news. Power doesn't shout here. It smiles, it fundraises, it remembers birthdays. Every corner of the Capitol has its own currency, favors, donations, silence. The city itself is a stage, and behind the velvet curtains, billionaires write the scripts. Among them sits Peter Thiel, the man Silicon Valley calls a visionary and Washington calls an enigma. He rarely appears in public, yet his fingerprints stain everything. He funds super PACs with quiet precision, bankrolls think tanks that shape national agendas, and buys influence the way others buy real estate, strategically, permanently. The man who preached disruption had built a fortress of stability for himself, one that stretched from D.C. boardrooms to offshore vaults half a world away. His allies call him a genius. His critics call him a shadow. But both agree Peter Thiel never loses. Until now. Enter Jasmine Crockett, a freshman representative from Texas who refuses to play by the city's unwritten rules. She doesn't dine with lobbyists or wait for permission to speak. Her words don't come wrapped in political polish, they land like gavel strikes. In a city fluent in euphemism, she speaks plain truth, and it rattles the walls. When Crockett arrived in Congress, insiders dismissed her as a loud voice from the fringes, another one-term firebrand destined to fade. But what they missed was her precision. Behind the Southern charm and the rapid-fire wit was a lawyer's mind sharpened by years of fighting for people who never had a lobbyist on their side. She studied tax codes the way others studied polling data. She listened when billionaires bragged off mic, and she noticed patterns: the same shell companies, the same addresses, the same evasions threads connecting luxury towers in California to bank accounts in the Caymans. Thiel's name appeared again and again, never directly, always through layers of plausible deniability. His influence was everywhere and nowhere, funding arguments before they were even spoken. He was the invisible architect of a political ecosystem where wealth and ideology fed each other in perfect symmetry. To most, it was untouchable. To Crockett, it was a challenge. Late nights in her office turned into early mornings of research. Staffers dozed off under the fluorescent hum, while she pieced together filings and donations like a detective mapping a conspiracy. Every discovery led to another door and another name that swore allegiance to Thiel's silent empire. But this wasn't just about one billionaire. It was about the system that allowed him to exist unchecked, the think tanks that shaped policy, the committees that looked the other way, the endless rotation of consultants who called it the game. Crockett didn't want to play the game. She wanted to flip the board. In hearings, her questions sliced through rehearsed talking points. She wasn't loud, but her calm precision unsettled even the most confident witnesses. Each session drew more eyes online. Each clip went viral not because she was angry, but because she was surgical. She had turned truth into a weapon, and DC had no defense for it. Still, few understood the scale of what she was circling. Lobbyists whispered her name with a mix of respect and irritation. Journalists began digging, following her trail. Somewhere deep in a private office, Peter Thiel's advisors noticed the same pattern and made a call. Because the moment a system realizes it's being exposed, it doesn't reform. It retaliates. But Crockett was ready. And she was about to step on a landmine disguised as an accounting line. The camera closes in on her eyes focused, relentless as the narrator's voice drops to a whisper that chills the air. But what Crockett uncovered wasn't just another loophole, it was a ticking time bomb hiding in plain sight. The sun never sets on Peter Thiel's empire, it just glints off a different coastline. In one hemisphere, venture capital offices hum beneath glass towers. In another, a private jet slices through dawn, heading toward the South Pacific. On board, the billionaire reclines in silence, laptop open, encrypted calls pulsing softly through noise-canceling headphones. For him, this is freedom, not the philosophical kind he preaches, but the fiscal kind that floats above laws, above nations, above consequence. To understand Thiel's power, you have to see how invisibility becomes currency. On paper, he owns nothing. In reality, he controls everything. The shell companies start in Delaware, branch into Luxembourg, dissolve in the British Virgin Islands, and reappear under new names in New Zealand. Each one holds another layer of wealth equity. Patents, real estate stacked like mirrors reflecting nothing but each other. He calls it efficiency. His lawyers call it innovation. The rest of the world calls it theft they'll never prove. In New Zealand, Thiel built what locals quietly called the billionaire bunker. Rolling green hills concealed server farms, discreet vaults, and luxury estates hidden behind legal trusts. Dual citizenship gave him a passport out of scrutiny, a back door through which billions slipped, untraced and untaxed. He had become the embodiment of his own ideology. The state is a burden, taxes are chains, and borders are for other people. To investors, he spoke in riddles of freedom. To politicians, he offered funding for innovation. To the press, he was the prophet of a post-national future, an age where individuals would rise above governments entirely. The audience applauded, unaware that the utopia he imagined was already being built in his name, financed by the taxes he refused to pay. At conferences, Thiel's speeches played like sermons, capitalism as salvation, regulation as sin. He'd stand before crowds of founders and financiers, smiling faintly, speaking softly, never sweating. "Freedom," he'd say, "isn't granted by governments, it's taken by those bold enough to claim it." Behind the words, a quiet irony pulsed like static. The freedom he described wasn't moral or civic, it was mathematical. It was coded into offshore spreadsheets, encrypted contracts, and perfectly legal deceit. Meanwhile, his inner circle lawyers, accountants, technocrats moved like priests of secrecy. They spoke in acronyms and whispers, crafting new entities faster than regulators could track them. Every loophole was a masterpiece, every exemption a trophy. And above it all, Thiel watched from his minimalist office, the skyline reflected on his glass desk like an empire of his own making. To his allies, he was visionary, too brilliant to be bound by bureaucracy. To his critics, he was the ghost in capitalism's machine. Everywhere, unaccountable, untouchable. But beneath the precision, Something darker stirred a belief that the rules didn't apply because he'd already won the game. There were rumors of offshore partnerships with crypto hedge funds, of land purchases routed through shell fronts tied to foreign trusts. Reporters who chased the story hit walls of non-disclosure agreements and sealed filings. The closer anyone got, the quieter they became. Thiel's genius wasn't just making money, it was making silence. And yet, for all his confidence, a flicker of arrogance betrayed him. At a private conference in Davos, surrounded by champagne and self-congratulation, he laughed off a question about offshore wealth. "The system's a joke," he said, swirling his glass. "I just learned to play it better." Cameras weren't rolling, but someone remembered. He didn't see Crockett coming. He didn't know her name. To him, power was something you inherited, purchased, engineered. He had no framework for someone who built it from truth. Meanwhile, as Thiel's network expanded across continents, whispers began surfacing on Capitol Hill. Anonymous memos, discrepancies in financial reports, subcommittees quietly asking, how could one man move billions offshore without triggering alarms? In his mind, he was invincible. Every audit redirected, every probe neutralized. But arrogance breeds pattern, and pattern breeds trace. Thiel's digital footprints began to repeat an identical subsidiary filing, a recycled IP address, a trust name that appeared in 2 countries on the same day. Little things no billionaire should ever overlook. And that's where Jasmine Crockett entered the frame. While Thiel chartered jets between hemispheres, she was back in her D.C. office, scanning documents with a pencil behind her ear. No team of consultants, no lobbyist whispering strategy, just patience and the rarest commodity in Washington: integrity. As Thiel toasted another year of innovation, his accountants missed a form, a misfiled subsidiary in a minor jurisdiction. It was a small thing, but Crockett saw it. She circled it, smiled, and whispered, "Got you." The empire would keep spinning for a while longer, glittering, humming, pretending, but the first crack had formed. Because for all its layers of secrecy, Peter Thiel's machine had one fatal flaw. It relied on everyone staying silent. And Jasmine Crockett was not everyone. Before the spotlight, before the viral clips, Jasmine Crockett was the woman walking into courtrooms that smelled of sweat and fear. Her clients weren't moguls or senators. They were tenants evicted without notice, mothers fighting for custody, protesters bruised and unheard. The law to her was never abstract. It was survival written in fine print. Dallas taught her that justice doesn't arrive. It's dragged into the room inch by people who refuse to shut up. She learned how to argue with precision, how to weaponize patience, how to outlast the arrogance of power with the endurance of truth. When she entered Congress, she carried that courtroom fire with her, the certainty that silence is complicity, and complicity is corruption. So when whispers of offshore schemes and shadow accounts started echoing through committee halls, Crockett didn't see it as scandal. She saw it as a pattern. The same story she'd seen her whole life, different faces, same hunger. The powerful protecting themselves while pretending to protect everyone else. Late nights became ritual. Her office lights glowed long after the building emptied. A single lamp, a half-empty coffee cup, and stacks of filings that no one else bothered to read. Names, subsidiaries, amendments, each one a thread. She traced them across borders and time zones, connecting dots that others had dismissed as noise. Her team warned her to slow down. "You're poking a bear," one aide said. She smiled, not out of arrogance but certainty. "Then we'd better make sure it's awake." There were moments when doubt crept in, the kind that comes not from fear, but from exhaustion. The kind that whispers, "You can't win against them. They've built this world to keep you out." Those nights she'd close her eyes and see her father's calloused hands, her mother's voice reminding her that courage isn't loud, it's consistent. And in the silence of that office, she'd think, if they can buy the truth, what's left of democracy? Threats came quietly at first. Anonymous calls with long pauses, invitations that felt more like warnings. "Come to dinner with donors. It'll be good for your future." She declined them all. A lobbyist sent flowers to her office. She sent them back. A donor hinted at a consulting opportunity that would broaden her influence. She didn't even look at the check. Every refusal made her lonelier, but also sharper. Her colleagues began to notice that she didn't flinch when billionaires testified, that she asked questions no one wanted on record. And beneath her calm tone there was something dangerous: conviction, the kind that can't be negotiated. The deeper she dug, the darker it became. Offshore filings masked under nonprofits, private equity investments tied to political committees. Thiel's name, always distant but never absent. His empire wrapped in enough legality to seem untouchable, but not enough to hide the rot. She read one document over and over, a trust transfer that didn't make sense. The figures were wrong, the timing too perfect. That was the moment she realized. This wasn't clever accounting. This was choreography, the hiding of billions disguised as efficiency, sanctioned by silence. She began marking everything with red ink, her desk a battlefield of circles and arrows. Her aides would find her at dawn, asleep on case files. "You've got to pace yourself," they'd plead. She'd shrug. "You can sleep when the truth's out." There were times she wanted to quit, not because of fear, but because the machine was so big, so perfectly insulated. But then, during one long night, she stumbled across a speech Thiel had given years earlier. In it, he smiled into the camera and said, "I no longer believe freedom and democracy are compatible." She replayed that line again and again. Freedom and democracy not compatible. The words hit like a slap. That was the arrogance she'd been chasing, the rot she'd been smelling. This wasn't just about taxes. It was about ideology, about men who believed they had transcended accountability. That night, her anger turned into clarity. This wasn't about destroying Peter Thiel. It was about defending the idea that no one stands above the country that made them rich. That freedom without responsibility isn't freedom. It's theft dressed as genius. In the weeks that followed, she built her case methodically, like an architect of reckoning. Every fact checked, every source verified. When she finally compiled the evidence, it wasn't a dossier of numbers, it was a story of deception. A story she was ready to tell in front of the world. Still, the threats didn't stop. Anonymous envelopes arrived with no return address. "Be careful," one note read in block letters. Another simply said, "He knows." Her staff begged her to hand it off. "Let the oversight committee handle it." But she couldn't. Not when she'd seen how easily truth gets buried under bureaucracy. One evening, after the building had emptied, she stood by the window of her office, looking out over the Capitol dome glowing against the night. The city looked peaceful, but she knew better. Every light in those marble halls hid a transaction. Every silence hid a deal. She whispered to herself, "They think I'm just one woman." A pause. Then, with quiet defiance, "They're right. One woman is enough." The morning of the hearing, she walked into the committee room with her folder clutched tight, every step deliberate. Cameras lined the walls. Microphones gleamed under white light. Somewhere in that crowd, Thiel's representatives waited, polished and smiling, confident in their untouchability. Crockett took her seat. She didn't look at them. She didn't need to. She'd already decided what kind of story this would be, not one about wealth, but about worth. Her heart pounded once, steady, like a drum before a march. The air in the room felt heavy, expectant, electric. The narrator's voice lowers, carrying the weight of inevitability. The day came when she faced Peter Thiel, and the cameras were rolling. The hearing room is packed, cameras stacked like a wall of blinking eyes. Reporters hunched forward, pens ready, knowing this isn't just another day on Capitol Hill. Peter Thiel sits at the witness table, posture perfect, expression unreadable, the portrait of calculated calm. Behind him, his legal team whispers in practiced sync, their confidence radiating like expensive cologne. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett adjusts her microphone. No grand gestures, no theatrics, just focus. Her stack of papers sits neatly in front of her, tabs marking the pieces of a puzzle no one else has dared to put together. The chair recognizes her. The hum of the room drops to a heartbeat. "Mr. Thiel," she begins, her voice smooth but carrying steel underneath. You've described yourself as a patriot, someone who believes in America's promise of freedom and enterprise. Would you consider it patriotic to hide American profits offshore? The question lands like a sharp chord. Cameras zoom. Thiel doesn't blink. Instead, he tilts his head slightly, lips curling into something between amusement and disdain. "Congresswoman," he says, leaning into the microphone, "I consider it smart." The room doesn't breathe. Reporters look at each other, stunned. Did he just say that out loud? Thiel reclines slightly, satisfied, convinced he's outmaneuvered her with a billionaire's charm offensive. Crockett doesn't move. Her eyes remain fixed on him, the silence stretching just long enough to make him uncomfortable. When she finally speaks, her tone is surgical. "Smart," she repeats softly. "You believe moving wealth out of the country that built your companies, educated your engineers, and protected your patents is smart?" He shifts in his seat, his smile tightening. "Congresswoman, business is global. Capital flows where it's most efficient." "Efficient for whom?" she asks, voice rising slightly but never losing control. "For the teachers whose taxes fund the schools you've never visited? For the small business owners who can't afford a single accountant, let alone a legal army? Who exactly benefits from your efficiency?" A low murmur ripples through the gallery. Thiel opens his mouth, but she's already pressing forward. "You've built your fortune in this country, Mr. Thiel. You've used our courts, our markets, our military-protected stability. And yet, when the bill comes due, your loyalty flies first class to New Zealand." Gasps. Cameras flash. The chair tries to gavel for order, but the room has already turned electric. Thiel's eyes narrow, his calm slipping for the first time. "Congresswoman," he says sharply, "I have contributed more to innovation, more to the economy, than most people in this building combined. If you want to punish success, say so." Crockett leans forward, voice low and measured. "No one's punishing success, Mr. Thiel. We're just asking it to be honest." Silence. A heavy, cinematic pause that feels like it stretches for hours. The camera pans lawmakers frozen, aides whispering, the faint click of pens. Somewhere in the back row, a young reporter mouths, "Wow." Thiel forces a smirk. "You can't regulate ambition, Congresswoman. You can only envy it." That's when she smiles, not out of amusement but recognition. The kind of smile that says, "There it is. The mask just slipped." "Ambition," she says slowly, "built this country. Exploitation nearly destroyed it." "You don't get to confuse the two." Thiel's jaw tightens. His attorney whispers urgently, but he waves him off. He's still trying to play the room, to win it back with intellect and arrogance. "Congresswoman," he says finally, "if you think I've done something wrong, show me the law I've broken." The air goes still. Even the cameras seem to lean in. Crockett reaches for her folder. Her hand moves with the precision of inevitability. She opens it, revealing a single document, a stack of filings bound in red. "Oh," she says quietly, eyes locked on his. "I intend to." Thiel blinks. Just once. The narrator's voice cuts in, low and resonant, over the image of Crockett sliding the document forward across the polished wood. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Every whisper, every heartbeat, waited for what came next. The camera captures the moment, the billionaire's confidence cracking, the Congresswoman unflinching. And then, the voice continues, the tension coiled like a held breath. She dropped the document that would change everything. The document lands with the softest sound imaginable, paper on wood, but in that instant, it echoes like thunder. The camera flashes erupt again, staccato bursts slicing through the tension. Thiel's smirk falters, his jaw tightening just enough to betray what the polished veneer can't conceal. Recognition. He knows what's in those pages. Crockett doesn't rush. She lets the silence work for her. Every second stretches. Every eye in the chamber press, peers, public is fixed on the woman holding a file thick enough to shift the balance of power. "Mr. Thiel," she says evenly, "these are filings obtained through public and international disclosures. They document a network of 32 shell entities, each one tied to you or your holding companies. Most are inactive on paper, but together they form a pipeline. a hidden artery moving profits out of the United States, through trusts in New Zealand, and into what I can only describe as a billionaire's black box. The words hit like body blows. Reporters' heads jerk up. Thiel's attorney whispers something frantic, but he doesn't answer. His gaze is locked on her hands as she turns the first page. "Let's start simple," Crockett continues. "Erebus Holdings, incorporated in Auckland. Its founding documents list your signature under a pseudonym, a name your staff used for foreign investment vehicles. The trust it funnels into? The Halcyon Fund." She holds up the paper. "Registered in a jurisdiction where American tax law can't reach." Thiel exhales slowly, eyes flicking toward the chairman, then back to her. "Congresswoman?" he begins, the control creeping back into his tone. "Those are legitimate investments." "Investments," she interrupts, "that have avoided over $800 million in domestic tax liability over 10 years. Investments that exist only to move American profits beyond American oversight." Gasps ripple through the room. The number lands heavy, a figure so vast it's both abstract and obscene. The chair calls for order, but no one listens. Crockett isn't finished. "You've said you consider this smart," she continues, voice rising. "Tell me, Mr. Thiel, how smart is it to hide behind shell companies while publicly lecturing Americans about patriotism? How smart is it to drain the country that made you rich and then call yourself a visionary?" Thiel shifts again, his confidence fraying. His lawyers scramble, sliding notes toward him, gesturing for silence. The cameras zoom closer. His face, a mask of composure cracking by degrees, fills every broadcast in America. Crockett presses on. "Here," she says, turning another page, "is correspondence between your financial counsel and a foreign bank in Wellington. It references something called Project Chrysalis. The stated purpose, asset migration and protection. But when you trace the numbers," she holds up a chart. Red lines connecting entities like a spider's web. "They lead straight to the offshore fund you created 2 years before you renounced your American citizenship." The words hang in the air. Someone in the gallery whispers, "He gave it up?" The cameras catch every flicker of expression. Thiel swallows. "I have dual citizenship, Congresswoman. Perfectly legal." Crockett doesn't blink. "Legal doesn't mean moral. And patriotic doesn't mean profitable." A pause. "The kind that splits a room in half." Reporters are already tweeting. Screens light up. Lash Thiel leaks. Tash Crockett exposed. Hash follow the funds. Within minutes, the hearing room transforms into the eye of a digital hurricane. Clips flood TikTok. Crockett's calm dismantling of Thiel, looping over dramatic soundtracks. On Twitter, financial analysts dissect every chart she held up. CNN cuts to breaking coverage. Fox runs the headline, "Thiel denies tax haven allegations." But inside the room, it's still just two people, one powerful, one principled, locked in the purest kind of confrontation. Truth versus control. "Mr. Thiel," she says softly, "you once said, 'Competition is for losers.' Maybe that's why you built a system where no one could compete with your corruption." He stares back, the silence between them sharp enough to draw blood. One of his lawyers stands, voice trembling. "Madam Chair." This is an egregious mischaracterization. Crockett cuts him off with a raised hand. "What's egregious," she says, "is how long men like him have been allowed to build kingdoms beyond accountability. The American people are done paying for their castles." Thunderous applause breaks out, not from the committee, but from the hallway outside where staffers, activists, and spectators have gathered around monitors. Security moves to quiet them, but it's too late. The sound bleeds into every broadcast. Crockett closes the folder, slides it across the table. "You called it smart, Mr. Thiel. I call it theft sanitized by paperwork." For a heartbeat, he looks as if he might answer. But he doesn't. He glances at his attorneys, then at the cameras. His mouth opens, then shuts. The silence is deafening. The narrator's voice cuts in, low and deliberate. Within minutes, the story exploded across every screen in America. The billionaire who built fortunes on ideology now stood exposed by a woman who refused to blink. The montage begins: CNN panels debating legality, MSNBC running timelines, Fox asking if she went too far. Social media fractures and unites at once. Hashtags trend in 50 states. Memes flood timelines. Thiel's frozen face juxtaposed with Crockett's calm stare. Captioned, "Truth doesn't need a trust fund." Outside, cameras swarm the Capitol steps. Reporters shout questions at Thiel's security detail, who form a tight wall around him. His car speeds off into the flashing chaos. In Silicon Valley, Thiel's companies watch their stock tickers dip. A venture fund suspends trading. In Washington, senators call emergency meetings to review oversight protocols. Behind closed doors, aides whisper that the balance of power just shifted, that Crockett might have done the unthinkable, made truth profitable again. That night, financial networks rerun the footage in slow motion. They freeze on her line, "Legal doesn't mean moral." It becomes a quote etched into headlines, reposted millions of times, and in living rooms across the country, people who had never heard of Jasmine Crockett feel something rare vindicated. A sense that, for once, someone had spoken the truth without blinking. Commentators call it the reckoning moment. On late-night TV, comedians replay Thiel's "I consider it smart" quip like it's the nation's new punchline. Economists call her hearing the first crack in the billionaire immunity complex. But for Crockett, sitting alone in her office hours later, it's quieter than that. The adrenaline fades. The glow of her laptop reflects off the same folder now stacked neatly to the side. She scrolls through messages, some hateful, some grateful, most awed. Her staff texts, "You did it." She types back only, "We did what was right." Outside, D.C. hums differently now. Reporters camp outside her door. Lobbyists whisper her name like a warning. Power brokers recalibrate. But she doesn't feel triumphant, just steady. Because beneath the chaos, she knows the storm hasn't ended. It's only changed direction. The narrator's voice closes the section, solemn but charged. This wasn't just one billionaire's loss, it was a victory for transparency. But the fallout wasn't just financial, it was cultural, and America was watching. The next 72 hours unfolded like an earthquake replayed in slow motion. What began as a congressional hearing turned into a financial contagion. By sunrise, markets were trembling. By noon, Peter Thiel's empire was bleeding. Bloomberg flashed a headline in scarlet, $800 million in holdings under review. CNBC anchors stumbled through segments, their usual polish cracking into disbelief. "We've never seen anything quite like this," one said, half whispering, as if afraid the numbers might hear him. Stocks tied to Thiel's ventures nosedived. Venture funds suspended withdrawals. Bankers in 3 time zones woke up to emergency calls. By the second day, regulators had announced formal investigations. Offshore accounts once shielded by secrecy were suddenly visible under global scrutiny. Law firms scrambled to restructure. PR agencies drafted statements that sounded more like surrender than defense. And Peter Thiel, the man who once preached that power belonged to those who avoided the spotlight, found himself unable to escape it. Cameras caught him leaving a Manhattan office, jaw set, ignoring questions as a reporter shouted, "Do you regret calling it smart, Mr. Thiel?" The clip looped endlessly online, paired with Crockett's voice from the hearing. "Legal doesn't mean moral." The contrast was cinematic, her calm truth against his silent retreat. Every major network seized the story. Editorials called it the 800 million reckoning. Op-eds debated what it meant for billionaires who thought themselves untouchable. The Washington Post ran a front-page spread titled, "The Congresswoman Who Humbled Silicon Valley." Even the Financial Times conceded, with restrained admiration, that Jasmine Crockett may have triggered the most significant political financial reckoning of the decade. Meanwhile, America couldn't stop watching. Hashtags multiplied. Crockett Truth, Thiel Leaks, Patriot, Not Profit, each one a digital cheer from a country hungry for justice. On TikTok, creators reenacted her confrontation, lips syncing her lines over swelling music. On Twitter, journalists quoted her with reverence usually reserved for presidents. Then came the memes. Thiel's frozen face beside Crockett's calm gaze, captioned "Checkmate." A photo of her folder with the tagline, "Weapon of Mass Transparency." Someone even designed a poster like a movie release, Crockett versus Thiel. The hearing that shook the billionaires. Late-night hosts turned the moment into legend. One quipped, "If honesty had a stock ticker, it just went public." Another joked, "Peter Thiel called it smart, Crockett called it taxable." The audience roared. But beyond the laughter, there was something else, a sense of vindication that ran deeper than politics. In diners, on buses, in break rooms, people were talking about fairness again. Not in abstract terms, but in plain ones. For once, it felt like the rules had worked, that truth had punched through the money fog. A teacher in Ohio tweeted, "For years, I've told my students that honesty matters more than wealth. Jasmine Crockett just proved it." A veteran in Arizona wrote, "Finally, someone stood up for us and didn't sell out." A mother in California posted a video of herself tearing up, saying, "I didn't even know her name before this week. Now I want my daughter to grow up like her." Across the country, something rare was happening. Faith not in politicians, but in integrity itself was flickering back to life. Meanwhile, Thiel's empire began to crumble under its own weight. Partners withdrew funding. A hedge fund severed ties. Foreign banks froze accounts pending investigation. Former allies turned to distance themselves, issuing sterile statements about corporate governance and ethical review. It was as if the machine he'd built to be invisible had suddenly turned transparent, and what people saw wasn't brilliance but decay. Financial analysts called it a correction. Historians called it a moment of reckoning. But ordinary Americans just called it justice. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett didn't celebrate. No grand speeches, no victory laps. When reporters swarmed her outside her office, she smiled politely, said, "The work continues," and disappeared into the building. Inside, she met with staffers and investigators, quietly strategizing. She knew the system she'd shaken would regroup. It always did. At night, she scrolled through messages from strangers, teachers, nurses, factory workers thanking her for making truth feel powerful again. She read them slowly, a small smile forming, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who understood that victories like this don't end, they echo. The narrator's voice rises softly, like a moral undercurrent running beneath the chaos. It wasn't just about the money, it was about reclaiming the moral currency of truth. For once, the market of ideas outperformed the market of greed. The camera pans across America, crowds cheering in Times Square as her clip replays on screens, students painting murals of her in Texas, families clapping in living rooms. But then the tone shifts, the music fades, the light dims, the narrator's voice lowers. While the country celebrated, the boardrooms were not silent. Old power never accepts defeat. It recalculates it. A cut to shadowed offices, lobbyists on phones, lawyers in midnight meetings, political operatives drafting strategies. Crockett sits alone at her desk, the Capitol lights flickering outside her window. She looks out, not triumphant, but alert because she knows what's coming next. The voice concludes, measured and foreboding. But Crockett wasn't celebrating, she knew the war had just begun. The city feels different now. The noise has thinned, the rush muted. Morning light drapes the Capitol in pale gold, washing away the tension that once hung in the air like static. Jasmine Crockett sits at her desk, coffee cooling beside her, a folder of thank you letters stacked where subpoenas used to be. Outside, cameras still linger, but they've grown quieter, their lenses waiting for the next scandal, the next storm. She exhales slowly, a sound half fatigue, half peace. It's over, at least for now. In the weeks since the hearing, the victories have been real but heavy. Her staff doubled their security protocols. She's learned to spot the unmarked cars that idle too long outside her apartment. Her inbox fills daily with praise and threats, both written in the same capital letters, both proof that she's touched something raw. Online, Disinformation campaigns swirl bot accounts calling her corrupt, fake stories claiming she's funded by foreign interests. She doesn't read them anymore. The truth doesn't need defending from lies. It only needs endurance. There were nights she couldn't sleep. Nights when the cost of what she'd done whispered in her ear, "You made enemies you can't see. You broke things that can't be repaired." But then she'd remember the teacher's email from Ohio, the mother's video from California, the veteran's message about faith restored. Those were the anchors she clung to, the reminders that courage, though costly, compounds. Now, as dawn spills across her office, she lets herself think about the cost. Integrity, she realizes, doesn't just demand honesty, it demands sacrifice. It takes from you the comfort of silence, the luxury of safety, the illusion that doing right will be enough. But it also gives something back. It gives you purpose. It gives you peace. Her reflection shimmers faintly in the window-tired eyes, steady posture, a woman who's seen what happens when truth finally wins around. She speaks softly to herself, the words more prayer than proclamation. Justice isn't glamorous. It's gritty. It's slow. But it's the only thing worth the fight. Somewhere in the distance, church bells ring. The sound feels symbolic, like punctuation at the end of a long chapter. The narrator's voice returns, gentle and reflective. She had faced the machine and survived not because she was fearless, but because she believed that fear is no excuse for surrender. Integrity always costs something, but what it buys lasts longer than power ever will. Images crossfade. Factory workers watching her hearing replay on breakroom TVs, students quoting her lines in civics classes, a grandmother telling her grandchildren, "That's what America is supposed to look like." It becomes clear her victory wasn't just hers. It was communal. It was what democracy is meant to be. Ordinary people acting extraordinarily. In her next speech on the House floor, she doesn't mention Thiel by name. She talks about transparency, about fairness, about how patriotism isn't measured in wealth but in accountability. The chamber listens differently now. The same colleagues who once dismissed her as too loud now lean in. Quiet. Her closing words are simple but heavy. We don't fix democracy by shouting louder. We fix it by standing longer. Applause builds not thunderous, but sincere, rising like the first light after a storm. That night, Crockett walks home without her security escort for the first time in weeks. The air smells of rain, the streets slick with reflection. Above her, the Capitol dome glows faintly, still flawed, still standing. She looks up and smiles, a quiet acknowledgement that truth, like dawn, keeps returning no matter how long the night tries to hold. The narrator's voice carries over the final image. Sunlight creeping over marble steps, the flag stirring in early wind. Greed is temporary. Integrity endures. The light doesn't shout, it just keeps shining. And for now, that's enough. The screen fades to black, and then a single line appears, soft and unresolved. But one unanswered question lingered: would Peter Thiel ever face justice? The story didn't end with that hearing. In the months that followed, Peter Thiel's empire unraveled thread by thread. Federal investigators opened probes into his offshore networks. Civil suits emerged from investors claiming deception. One by one, the accounts he thought were hidden went dark: assets frozen, partners fleeing, allies silent. The man who once moved billions with a whisper now faced the deafening sound of accountability. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett never looked back. She became a symbol not of politics, but of principle, a reminder that truth doesn't need permission to speak. Her name echoed across state lines, from classrooms to kitchen tables, carried not by headlines, but by hope. In a city where integrity is often currency spent too quickly, she chose to invest in something rarer: conviction. The narrator's tone swells, the music beneath building like a heartbeat. She didn't just expose a scheme, she exposed a system. And in doing so, she reminded a nation that democracy isn't defended by the powerful, but by the persistent. Images flash. Thiel walking briskly past cameras, no words left to spin. Crockett shaking hands with volunteers. Citizens rallying outside courthouses with signs that read, "Truth is patriotic." And then the closing line, delivered like a final strike of clarity. Because when truth stands tall, even the billionaires have to kneel. The music fades, replaced by silence that feels earned. Then the voice returns, calm and resolute, speaking directly to the audience. If this story moved, you share it. Let it echo louder than the lies, so this truth never gets buried. And subscribe for more stories of power, courage, and consequence. Because the reckoning isn't over. Fade to black. The title appears one last time. The reckoning continues.